Thank you. All right, then let's get started. Okay, so my name is Howe. I'm founder and CEO of Tokka Labs, right? We are a prop trading firm, and we do a lot of DeFi strategies, right? So now, very quickly, right, let's introduce our panels, right? Okay, so maybe we just go around, right? Just introduce yourself, tell us about your project, and tell us, right? Preconf, yeah or nay?
Hey, I'm Howe, the co-founder of Enso. Enso's built an intent engine that abstracts how to interact on-chain, whether you're building a product in DeFi, NFTs, or any arbitrary smart contract outcome. I don't really have an opinion.
Hey, I'm Markus, founder of Propeller Heads, and we've done solving for quite a while, but very recently we switched to building infrastructure for solvers. We just launched Tycho, T-Y-C-H-O. It's not on Tycho yet, but it might be soon. And yeah, our job is to make the hardest parts of solving and searching easy so that it's easy to trade on any on-chain liquidity. And preconfs, yes, exciting, but in their current version, maybe not yet, but I think there's a future to this, and definitely, of course, relevant to all solvers.
Hi everyone, my name is Nikita, co-founder of Barter. So Barter is a solver on CowSwap, Uniswap X, Bebop. We are trying to see how we can improve, user efficiency and what do we need to do in order to bring back composability to DeFi and how a solver can evolve or just like anything related to on-chain trading and aggregators evolve from like a black box, which is currently it is, into a more transparent, efficient layer. And yeah, this is what we do.
Cool. My name's Matt. I'm a co-founder at Odos. So Odos is a DeFi aggregator, order router, and solver. And preconfs, I think, definitely interesting, but still TBD on yay or nay.
Okay, so hopefully you all will have an opinion by the end of this panel, okay? So, all right, let's get started, right? Okay, let's address the first problem, right? Do you all face any problems with lending transactions today? Anyone can start.
Landing.
Yeah,
sure.
lending, getting transactions on chain. Yeah.
I think yes and no. I think there's really two surprising answers to this. One is in some cases, like in CowSwap, it is surprisingly little of an issue. I know that officially solvers are supposed to calculate in the risk of settling on a certain pool. To my understanding, not many solvers actually do that. They just look for the best trade and then hope for the best. And this works out surprisingly often. I think Felix can probably give a much more detailed view on that, but it does work sufficiently well. And solvers are not too concerned in certain models, with landing. But it is quite different, for example, in Uniswap X, where you get strong adversarial selection, where you only win the quotes, where the market makers know that there's a big movement off-chain. So they know that there will be contested state, there will be a sextex ARB. You think you can settle this trade, and then you can't. And then you get slashed, or slashed in apostrophe, you don't get to be a quota anymore, because you settle too rarely. So in some models, it's not such a big problem. In some models, it's a big problem. So I think that is maybe an interesting hint that the mechanism design of the auction is very relevant to how interesting preconfs are, or how necessary preconfs are, and how they don't.
Not really. We only generate call data, then return it. CowSwap manages that for us. We only do it in one protocol, Bebop. But apart from that, we don't really settle ourselves. We take a position, we purely just find and abstract how to interact on-chain, and then we return that call data for other people to manage. We see this being a completely different sector. There's going to be new products built purely just for this, and we just want to focus on abstracting and how to interact on-chain.
We've had some issues in the past. We tried to build very aggressive routes and that maximize user tokens and give them best value. And yeah, it wasn't the best strategy. And we are super excited about pre-confirmations, especially in the future, how it will pan out, and yeah, how we can make it part of our tech stack.
Matt, any opinions?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess at Odos, we also execute across a wide variety of chains beyond mainnet, and there's also a lot of differences in terms of sort of specific things on each chain that change how execution will happen. So that definitely introduces some additional challenges. I think mainly related to preconfs, it's the biggest thing that's very useful is when you're trying to do things on two different chains, and you can, if you can get some sort of pre-confirmation that there's not going to be a change in finality for the transaction that you're trying to land, that's maybe the biggest impact. And as we do more cross-chain things, I think that'll become more relevant.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant, right? Because I think we do a lot of cross-chain activities, and yeah, preconf would be a very useful thing in this case. Okay, but anyway, if you have noticed, we have one more panelist right over here right now, right? Vishwa, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I underestimated Bangkok traffic and the accuracy of Grab overall. Apologize. My name is Vishwa, co-founder and CEO at Anera. We're building a programmable liquidity layer that kind of looks like a decentralized prime brokerage if you squint hard enough. I don't want to shill any further, so I was just catching on to the tail end of the question. And I think for single chain context with the three of you, and I think cross chain was how I was perceiving the question, and had a conversation with the PrimeF team about how this could be useful. I know you're also a solver and a cross, specifically for sort of winning those foot races, and if you can figure out what the price is and how much you're willing to underwrite that risk. Clearly, there's a use case there. However, as someone that has been plotting the dashboard to see sort of profitability for solvers versus gas paid, the real question remains, like, how much can you actually pay for this service? And the commitment itself, I think there's a level beyond which you don't want to take on that risk, right? Like, even if you're market maker, that risk of equivocation potentially, as well as like how many of the block builders do you get a guarantee from versus how much money are you willing to put on the line there? I think it comes down to the ability to be able to underwrite risk from a cross-chain context. And certainly will be implications. I think you might even see bridge times come down for maybe some more user-facing activities. I think applications are in a pretty good position to underwrite risk if they want to create new UX that we haven't necessarily seen, especially coming into Ethereum. You can, if you're willing to, as an application, underwrite that risk, your users might not have to wait as long as, canonical block time. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so just quick show of hands, right? Who is already experimenting with using preconfs? Anyone? Aha, okay, can, no problem, right? Okay, that means it's a, blue ocean out there, right? There's lots of opportunities, okay? Okay, is there, any, particular reason why, you guys are not already experimenting with preconfs, for example, on the testnet, is it because there's not enough, information out there, or you all don't feel that, this is something that is like top of my priority list?
Solvers need execution preconfs, right? To my understanding, we're not there yet. And until we have execution preconfs, there's not much you can do as a solver. I mean, you'd have to corner out the cases where it becomes useful. But yeah, useful for competition and winning more flow, I think, once we have execution preconfs.
Cool. Anyone else has a different opinion?
Actually, it's interesting for cross-chain, right? Because execution preconf for cross-chain is actually an inclusion preconf, because it's like an FCFS auction. So it's probably more useful to us from a chain abstraction context, all of those buzzwords. Yeah, it becomes useful in terms of why we haven't experimented with it. It's been a question of time. Just getting around to it, it's something that we definitely want to test out and see sort of what the limits are there. And just wanting to also see that infrastructure develop a little bit. One of the rules that we've kind of like instituted and put in place is that we don't really want to be first to any ecosystem anymore. We want these things to mature a little bit more before we put weight behind it, because our goal in 2025 is to put meaningful weight behind the things we do. And I think in order to do that, you've got to manage your risk a little bit more carefully.
Yeah, I agree with both points. I mean, primarily for us, we've been kind of moving away from the solver aspect to more building unique applications on top of Enso. So we have like DeFi automation tools, Zapier of Web3, We have a new protocol that's launching in 2-3 weeks for one of the largest chains, a two-sided marketplace. So we've started going into more unique applications. Now, again, we kind of offset that risk of execution to other people. We don't really focus on that ourselves.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add. I think it really does come down to it being available on the chains that solving is taking place on, similar to how we don't do any solving on testnets really, because typically it's more useful to just simulate things on mainnet with real DeFi ecosystems. So for now, it's more of a research topic.
I also think the urgency is very related to how much you hold your own liquidity. And I don't know if show of hands, who is a solver here who's managing their own liquidity and solving with their own liquidity? Okay, so this is the exception, right? And I think the assumption is that
it's me as well.
the assumption is that most solvers have liquid. So was that one of your questions?
Oh no. So yeah, definitely that's correct. Yeah, please continue. Yeah.
So I think the assumption is that most solvers holding liquidity or want to hold liquidity or will manage liquidity. I think that assumption is not correct. Definitely not today. And even if you ask all the solvers what their plans are, they don't want to. And that puts the usefulness of preconfs more towards those players who do want to do that. And even, Odos would have a lot of incentive to actually become a cross-chain solver and have liquidity, and still they decide against it. Because it is higher payoff to focus on specialize and then compose yourself with market makers whose job it is to do that. And maybe the question is more relevant and urgent to market makers.
Fair enough, right? So I think what we have covered so far, right, is that there are different types of precons, right? The ones that are, probably more mainstream are your inclusion ones as well as your execution ones. And we find that for a single chain, right, execution is probably more important, right? While cross-chain, maybe inclusion will be sufficient. And we also, talk about the fact that, probably for solvers, if it's just atomic, right, it's all in the contract, right? If it just doesn't execute, it's not too much of a problem for them, right? They don't suffer any losses, except that maybe in specific cases, they get, penalized on certain protocols, right? So those are very specific cases. But otherwise, if you have inventory, right, prefcom seems very important to you, right? Because that could, be the difference between whether you lose the money or not, right? Okay, cool, right? So I think we now have a clearer picture, of where, solvers are thinking about, right? Okay, so now let's say, okay, that, prefcoms are already available, right? Well, let's say you have execution prefcoms already, right? Okay, what are some of the, immediate things that you think that you will be able to make you useful?
Competitions will become more complex, right? I mean, today, as you said, you just build the call data, you send it to CowSwap, and then you see if you win or not, and then CowSwap executes. Rather simple. I mean, it's not simple, but rather simple. Now, I need to worry about maybe there is a solver who got an execution preconf on their transaction, and my bid that I submit to CowSwap will not land. CowSwap will need to worry about that. So it becomes two auctions that need to run back to back and are interdependent. I don't know what the repercussions are, but it sounds to me like some things might become quite more complex. That's the first thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I think immediately pricing these things becomes incredibly important and where the competition skews. And I think that's where a slightly divergent take to Markus, which is specialization might be a little bit tricky there because you cannot price the pre-confirmation in isolation with how much your payoff is going to be per bundle or per transaction. You're going to have to be willing to lose margin somewhere to make it up in the overall sort of execution cadence. And this is where market makers are pretty good at doing this because they're able to have alpha on what prices are going to be in the next second, millisecond, minute, hour. And so perhaps they're willing to price certain payoffs in a way that's just not viewed in isolation to the event happening now, but perhaps with a viewpoint of what's happening 15 minutes down the line, which I think becomes edge. Although I will say that there will be services that allow you to kind of compose with a service like that as well. But there will also be a super vertically integrated entity like SCP that does everything and continues to...
So precoms will be centralizing?
Yes. Yes. I don't know, is that a surprise to everyone? Show of hands, how many people are surprised by that take? Okay, cool. I guess it's not a surprise to anyone then.
Okay. So yeah, maybe that's not where we really want to get to, but no problems, right? We'll see how it goes, right? Okay. So okay, so right now, right, I get a sense that you're kind of like apprehensive, with this pre-con thing because it's going to make things more complicated, right? There's already enough things on our plate to worry about, okay? So maybe let's take a step back, right? If you guys, had a say in, how pre-con is going to, develop, right? What do you all think is needed, right? What is necessary, right? So that solvers would be more open to it. Is it, integrations with certain protocols, right? So, or, more visibility, how things are priced, any opinions on this? What do you all think, the current pre-con mechanisms need to change into?
I mean, I think market structure in this space is so fragile that as soon as someone does it once, it becomes the new meta. So someone is, I think for this to take off, someone needs to do it once and generate enough alpha that everybody now has to do it, right? Like it just, kind of becomes like subsidying with blocks and stuff like that. Then just all of a sudden, this becomes table stakes for the game, and then that's it. So I think from a product perspective, it's a cool product we're building and selling. But from a market structure perspective, it's just like it just feels like this part of the supply chain is like an infinite race to the bottom until the order flow becomes much larger than it is at the moment. But yeah.
I mean, there's like a hopeful second step, right? If you have atomic cross-chain composability thanks to precoms, maybe through something like based rollups, then it becomes a solving game again, right? Like if you circle all the way back to atomicity, then the solvers have the edge again. And then those systems will apply, like you can just have solver on Unichain, a solver on mainnet, or not, yeah, but let's see if they have I don't know if they have a realistic path to atomic cross-chain composability, but just say 2 chains they do, then you can easily access all of that liquidity as if you are on one chain. And then it's just it's a solving game again. So in that sense, maybe it's a hopeful, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from what I understand, the L1 to L2 sort of cross-chain part in particular is potentially helped a lot by pre-comps. And then, like Markus says, it becomes basically just solving in the same way you solve on a single chain because you no longer need to sort of bridge that gap and with the finality risks on both of those chains. So that case is particularly interesting.
Connor, or no opinion on this? I don't have an opinion. No. Okay, I think we have established the stage, right? Like probably cross-chain is somewhere where this is going to be more relevant immediately, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about cross-chain liquidity, right? Is that something that you guys are really looking at right now? What are your thoughts? How do you think it's going to develop?
Yeah, I think it's 2 different games: solving versus market making. Market making, holding inventory. Sure, you're doing solving as well, right? For us, we do not want to enter into the inventory game. We see it as a very different characteristic of teams. So for us, we like to aggregate, abstract, how to interact on chain to make developers' journey a lot easier. Whereas as soon as we start entering into inventory, then it's a whole different specialization that we currently don't know. Sure, we can learn, but why don't we just leverage other solutions, right? Why don't we plug into other market makers, other people that have this experience? And then an intent expression could be a combination of market makers' liquidity and then also call data generated from different solutions into one, right? So I think this specialization is very, very key and very, very valuable, right? We don't need to start branding everything under the name of solver that can do everything. And I think that's kind of where we could be heading if we don't start specializing. So roundabout way of saying no, we won't be doing it, just because people like yourselves and so forth are a lot better than we are.
Yeah, cross-chain solving is all about inventory and managing risk. And there are so many, like solvers are at a very vulnerable position with cross-chain, like you're not just taking inventory risk, but there are risks of reworks, risks of some kind of other protocol issues, and just losing money is fairly easy. Plus, cross-chain trading and cross-chain intents, they are usually just like bridging, and they're not super sophisticated in terms of action. When we do like swap within one chain, we can see sometimes magic happens, solvers capture MEV, they give it back to user. There are like a lot of different protocols, liquidity sources involved, but with cross-chain is a little bit simple, at least right now. Maybe later, with Preconf, with more, atomicity for transactions that we can do, it will be part of our scope. But for now, it's not something we are looking into.
Yeah, I think solvers, ultimately, the job of solvers is to deal with complexity, right? Like the routing problem is probably the most enigmatic part of solving, right? Is the router itself, and then there's a lot of grunt work. But if, like as you said, cross-chain solving is mostly just about bridging assets, and that's mostly just about managing inventory risk. It's already so simple, right? With precoms, I think we will very likely have cross-chain filler automated solutions like AMMs that are fully automated and on-chain, and the liquidity is provided passively by a diverse set of individuals and not longer by market makers, because there is not much of an edge that you can gain here, especially with precoms then, which is great because then you can decentralize the job of cross-chain bridging, and you have one more piece that is not forcing like off-chain centralization. So I think, yeah, in that sense, they will allow for automated protocols to manage this.
Any opinions from Matt?
Yeah, I think it's similar for us. We've, I think, been looking at cross-chain for a while, but so far it doesn't seem like something that we want to get into more, at least in the current state, when it does sort of rely on managing your liquidity and managing finality and all these other things. So I think something like these L1, L2 preconfs or the OP superchain bridge, if that comes to fruition, these things that make it much cleaner to go between chains, those make it a lot more interesting for us, I think.
Yeah, I think so far what we have discussed, right, is that Preconf itself is more of like a risk management tool, right, and they are only useful in this case, right, in cases where we are taking risk, right, finality risk or anything other risk, right. So for most of the work that solvers are doing, especially if it's on a single chain, right, there really isn't that much risk, right. So which means the application of Preconf is not that high, right. So that means Preconfs, if they were to gain mainstream adoptions, right, what they would do is that they would now allow solvers, right, to be able to do more things, right, because now there are more areas that are no longer as risky as they were before, right. So I think that is the contribution of Preconfs, how it can actually help solvers in that space, right, open up more opportunities, right. Okay, so you guys have always been in the space, like solving. You guys have been OGs in the space, right. From your experience, right, for a protocol, like or for a change like Preconf itself, right, to take root, right, is it something that it's very difficult because the data itself is not available? Do you all feel that there needs to be more work done in this space, right? To illuminate what's actually happening in the space, right? Do you all need, for example, real time information? That's just like how we can price our gas and everything. Do you all feel that some of these periphery are important?
I think you're the most relevant. You're doing cross-chain, no? Yeah, as I said earlier, I think it's going to be the question of like who does it first, basically. I think all cross-chain fillers / market makers are going to sit on the sidelines until they're just like, okay, one of us is going to do it, and then everybody has to do it. In terms of like being able to predict gas prices, it just depends what your strategy is. If you're like a prop firm, because you'll have a different vantage point of what you want to execute versus if you're like high frequency, you need to know every block, or like you're just way more in the weeds about what gas prices look like on a much more granular time frame. Now, where pricing strategy skews long term is, I imagine it'll be super event based, where for some events one strategy outperforms another. Where someone has taken a slightly longer term picture of what gas prices are going to look like versus someone that takes one sort of like, every block. I think there's like a decent amount of prior art here, right? Because I feel like, you guys do a bunch of gas optimization as well as solvers. And so I don't think it's that far apart in terms of like the skill set. I think where the ability to price it is, I suppose, the only thing where you instead of being a price taker, you sort of become a price maker here, and it's a little bit of a change. But I mean, on the cross-chain side, it's like if this starts happening, man, like there's just not enough money out there for people to, like, probably you're going to be the only one filling it, because I will back out. Like, I'm not gonna be like paying for pre-confs on top of this already like declining margins that you get as a cross-chain filler. I just don't see it being worth our time at all. But I mean, everybody has like different strategies here and where they think edge is. I don't see it being like a consistent source of edge.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, that is not. I mean, if you stretch the concept a little bit, pre-confs are already happening, and they're already used to make some solvers and searches much more competitive. So if you look at, for example, the integration, I don't know if you've seen Bob, the integration of 0x Princess's searcher backrunner and in a TDX behind the R builder run on a TE by Flashbots. Now that's already generating a couple of million a month in additional revenue. And this is essentially a pre-conf integration. I mean, you could understand it as such, where trustlessly the builder is giving a confirmation to the searcher. Therefore, both can act more efficiently. And I think these incentives are strong and they're real, and there will be more and more doing this. Yeah, so, and I think was last week at sequencing week, and there's a lot of progress done on unifying the different systems. And I do think that they will arrive earlier than we think. But ultimately, it's a social game, right? So we need to work together on it being standardized, and then it really has a chance. But yeah, I'm hopeful that it will work, especially because there is strong economic incentives, and there's already bilateral pre-confs on direct agreements already actually in existence and producing advantages for some searchers and some solvers.
Yeah, I mean, really simply, if we see people making money, we'll do the same, right? So it's similar to what people were doing on CowSwap. Some people were deliberately losing money on trades just to get that order flow, right? And then certain solvers started playing that game as well and kind of forcing people not to lose money to kind of make it a bit more fair. And I think this is what's going to happen with pre-comps as well. So if everyone starts entering into this space, starts playing those games as well, then everyone will start doing this, including us.
One outcome is the most likely outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah, the most hilarious outcome is probably what's going to happen, right? Okay, wait, but no, I just want to echo, what Markus mentioned, right? If we look at it from another way, right? Currently we talk about, integrated, searcher builders, right? That is a form of, pre-confirmation, right? The searcher gets a pre-confirmation from its own builder that, dude, I'm going to get your transaction in, right? You're going to get included on the block, right? It's just that, pre-conf now make this capability available to more people, right? That you don't really now have to have the capability to run the full stack, right? You now would be able to still access, these potential benefits, right? But yeah, I would agree, right? I think the current vibes on the panel is that, it's still a wait and see approach because no one has seen someone making that move. But if someone has, made that, dash for it, right? Everyone's going to go after it, right? So it's kind of everyone's waiting on each other. Okay, cool. Because, right, have you ever thought about, in terms, because to talk about what Vishwa said, right, the costs, right? You feel that, you are not going to pay extra on top of it, right? But could it be that, you end up paying less in terms of gas, right? And instead you divert some of these payments now over into pre-con payment. Have you thought of it that way?
I mean, I would say like that would probably end up being a short-term thing where, initially you're just like, okay, I might be saving some on gas by getting these. Although I don't really see that happening. I don't know. I don't think so. I feel like for the most part, it's just going to be like an added cost. Like on a long enough time horizon, it's a new cost that you pay. And by the way, like, as markets get more and more liquid, spreads naturally compress on everything that's, like a repeat source of order flow. FX markets in the world, you have like sub 1 basis point spreads, right, on like trillions of dollars of notional volume every day. So the idea that spreads will compress over time is not something that's, unforeseen. It's fascinating with sort of the market structure that we have in Ethereum with this additional complexity that gets layered on, because it's almost like you're playing like three-dimensional chess when you're trying to figure out like how do I actually price or whether I should actually compete for this stuff or not. So I actually don't necessarily see there being some sort of like realized profit on the part of solvers because they're paying less gas. I think probably ends up being a cost that gets added on. And I mean, fair play, I think, the builders potentially get to monetize even better. And I don't know, maybe that incentivizes some builder decentralization, although I'm not super bullish on that happening, but yeah.
Yeah, you wanna?
I just want to say, builders already make enough money. We're redirecting over there.
Some new ones maybe come in.
Yeah, I think there's a tension. There's a tension where it's not really incentive compatible for the sequencing layer to rebate anything upstream. They're incentivized to ultimately to capture as much of the value as possible. So there's whether it's built that way or not, but there's definitely the incentive to do so. Any sort of more efficient system to bid for the inclusion doesn't necessarily make it cheaper for the bidders. I think solvers, I don't know, maybe solvers just need to start charging a fee, right? And all collectively. No, like in the execution, right? I mean, like other layers are doing it, right? Maybe that is much more a sustainable model than trying to move the needle further down into optimizations. Maybe that's much more of a sustainable model, right? I think PowerSwap is moving in that direction as well, right? They're charging, like, very clearly charging fees, and to make the business viable. Yeah, maybe Solver should do the same.
Yeah, just want to add a few points that I think Solving is evolving a lot, along with DeFi, along with AMMs and everything. Like, liquidity is becoming more competitive. Liquidity is also moving away from L1s. We have Unichain coming, and Solving is also done in like kind of, I would say, not ideal optimal way where you have to integrate hand by hand all the liquidity, and everyone is doing that. So like, the game is evolving. Preconfs are a big part of it. Nobody knows how it will all play out and pan out. And like, yeah, maybe we will be charging fees. Maybe, block builders will be making a lot less money with, when order flow leaves L1s. Yeah, we just have to figure it out all together as a community.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add. I guess if, to the extent that anything like pre-comps or anything else becomes an alternative way to bid for inclusion, I think that ultimately ends up being a race to zero as well as anything else for solvers. And a fee would need to be at the protocol level or at the auction level, I guess, in this case, in order to work, unless all the solvers were going to form a oligopoly of sorts.
That was going to be my last addition was like, solver M&A might be closer than we think at some point.
You heard it here first. Solver M&A is happening. Okay. 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 I think the panelists have brought up a pretty good point, right? The way I see it, right, is that whoever has monopoly power is going to extract as much rent as possible, right? So Preconf now, eventually, it effectively gives the validator, the ability to be the monopoly, right? So it's going to extract rent from the builders, it's going to extract rent from the solvers. Everyone else in the middle is going to suffer, right? This is at least how we see it. The silver lining is, okay, because it's so competitive, right, it's going to force everyone to innovate, right? You're going to have to start looking for new opportunities, right? That's going to force solvers, start thinking out of the box, right? What works today no longer is going to work, right? And that, would be good for the ecosystem, right? We'll be able to identify new opportunities, right? New things will be able to happen in the space. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the panel, okay? I'm just going to ask, one or two more questions before we open up to the floors, right? Okay. How do you all think, that the solver landscape is going to evolve in 2025? Okay. Let's start with Matt this time.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I know, to be honest. I think for us, it seems like, I guess, related to the comment I just made, ultimately, a lot of the power in terms of value extraction comes from who controls the order flow. And when you participate as a solver, you do not control the order flow. So I think that's going to continue to be a challenge for solvers to do that in a way that's sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, then ultimately you get solvers dropping out of these auction mechanisms because it's not worth it to participate because they can't extract enough value. So I guess if there might be clever mechanisms that you can involve at the auction level in these systems to maybe make it more sustainable. So in a more positive outlook, maybe we see more of that, and we can see systems that better allow for a more diverse set of solvers to continue on. Alternatively, you see a shrinking set of solvers, or just a shrinking overall market share for these things. So I think those are maybe the two possible paths.
I agree about the importance of order flow. Order flow is like everything, and it's extremely fragmented. You know, we have a lot of wallets, dApps that ship it to different venues. And what we really hope to see is composability between those order flow, like uniting and combining orders from different venues and, you know, settling them maybe against each other, reducing fees, bringing a little bit more efficiency. So that's one thing that would really love to happen in like next year. And also, you know, we would not be surprised that someone figures out like a secret component, maybe a combination of like private liquidity, pre-confirmations, and other elements of the stack to gain like a lot of market share. So far, none of the solvers have been like really dominant or even like aggregators or venues. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone like breaks this trend and becomes, you know, the main place for DeFi activity to happen, especially like from intents and trading perspective. Yeah.
I hope not. Yeah, I think that we're seeing there's a bunch of interesting things that are happening. Earlier, I think someone mentioned that we have so many solvers. I think we don't have nearly enough solvers. There's maybe enough solvers in CowSwap on mainnet, but if you go to any other solver ecosystem on any other chain, they don't have enough solvers because solving is too hard today. I think what will happen very soon, and what's happening now already, with solvers who are integrating Taiko and other tooling like that, that solving becomes much simpler. The barrier of entry to become a solver becomes lower. And when you lower the barrier to entry to do something complex, then the people who've been working on doing all the grunt work can now focus on doing innovative stuff. And there will be more solvers. There will be more solvers specializing in more things. And there will be more localized winners. That's ultimately what we're building towards, that there are more localized winners who win in certain types of solving. And if you look at something like CowSwap, I think they already, and they're not naming it, but I think they already have quite innovative systems about how to keep the solver system decentralized. I think what's something that's underappreciated, for example, is how CowSwap does pluralistic sourcing, meaning they don't just award the profits to the winner of the auction. You can never win in CowSwap and still make a good living, just by showing up, providing good quotes consistently. And these kinds of systems, we need them to continue having a diverse and decentralized solver ecosystem. I hope, that's why I said I hope not. I hope we don't have centralization there. Because what's the difference between a centralized DeFi trade supply chain and CeFi, right? But where is the real difference then anymore? We no longer have multiple legs to stand on. We no longer have censorship resistance. It's no longer permissionless. So we really hope that solving becomes easy, and then we will have many more individual teams like Copium who can specialize, focus, and really deliver new innovative types of solving. And solving will never go away because ultimately solvers do something very valuable. Like, you cannot have a composable DeFi ecosystem that we have without solvers. Like, either you standardize everything and then it becomes like NASDAQ and then you don't need a solver anymore, or you keep open this infinite garden of DeFi innovation and liquidity provisioning and different trading curves and so forth, and then you need solvers. So they will stay here, but I think we just need to make their job much easier so we can have the innovation part instead of all of the unnecessary work that they have to do today.
Yeah, very similar view. I think it's going to go into a lot more specialization, which actually results in a lot more centralization. I think the base layer will be decentralized, such as AMM routing, But then as soon as you go into more complex, such as DeFi, like lending, borrowing, LPing, then you go into NFTs, and then you go into any arbitrary smart contract state that can be obtained from an intent, I think those sectors are going to be, yeah, more centralized, right? Is that good for the ecosystem? Why not? It kind of pushes us up to many different layers, many different use cases of intents and also solvers. Do I think solvers are a bit zero-sum? Some degree, yes, unless you specialize. So if you're just doing the base routing, and if you're very, very good at this, then you can generate good revenue. If you're focused purely in DeFi and you specialize in that and you capture all this market. So yeah, I see it going more in specialization and a bit more centralization on particular use cases.
You're going to see the first Silver DAO?
We spoke about this last year and it never happened.
I have two predictions, right? So my first prediction is that you start to see a lot more solvers on Solana, and they arguably make more money on Solana than they ever did on Ethereum. Because I think right now on Solana, the asset creation velocity is a lot higher than it is on Ethereum. So you have way more long tail stuff, and they get launched infinitely faster and cheaper than on Ethereum. As liquidity pours into crypto, every sort of like alt and non-blue chip asset starts to get more liquid. And what will happen as a product of that is on Ethereum, more order flow through intent-based systems starts to go through private liquidity because market makers start to get comfortable holding more assets as they get more liquid. And the sort of, you're not so worried about the price unpredictability of like governance tokens of DeFi blue chips maybe, right? Like let's just say everyone today is holding the stables and the majors, and almost all of that is filled using that inventory. Maybe towards the end of 2025, you probably have like stables, majors, plus maybe DeFi blue chips being held as well. And so my two predictions are, number one, solvers make more money on Solana. Number two is on Ethereum, more order flow gets filled using private liquidity of assets that are not covered today by market makers.
Are you doing Solana?
No, we're not.
Is anyone doing Solana?
Is anyone in this room doing Solana searching, solving?
Anyone? Don't be shy.
No one's going to tell us.
No one's going to share the alpha. Okay, we still have a couple of minutes, right? From the floor, do we have any questions?
Great panel, guys. Thank you. Vishwa, I just want to ask you more on that Solana question. Why do you think solvers can compete on Solana versus order books or AMMs if you're getting 400 millisecond block times and you're getting low latency?
So to understand that market structure, the best thing that you can do is compare Phoenix's volumes on Solana to the rest of Solana order flow, and then look at the token pairs that Phoenix actually has versus the rest of the order flow. So all tokens that market makers are willing to hold are usually quoted on Phoenix, the order book. That's like a familiar experience for these market makers. These are assets that they hold on centralized exchanges anyway, and so that takes care of filling that volume. But everything else right now in Solana is a shitcoin, and market makers are not going to be touching shitcoins for like a bunch of different reasons. Number one, just doesn't fit their liquidity and risk profile. Number two, regulatory is a challenge, and so that's where I think routing becomes super interesting. I think more venues start to emerge on Solana that make slightly more interesting design choices. And I think at some point, some sort of specialized solvers will be able to reverse the dominance of, is it Jupiter or is it Jupiter, right? So I think we had 1 inch start off with aggregation, and then you realize that there was a lot more alpha in figuring out routing much better. And there you have this super expressive ecosystem of solvers that have figured out routing to a greater extent than Jupiter can. And that's why I think that that's going to happen next year, because they will be going through their first cycle of maturity as beyond just an alt L1. They now have multi-billion-dollar protocols and those tokens on that chain, and clearly will end up being the sort of meme coin platform of the next sort of DeFi bull run. And so I think on the other side of that is where all of this maturity starts to kick in, where it's just like you need this better execution infrastructure. And so that's why I think it's going to happen on Solana as well. There will be a need for better execution on Solana than there currently is. I think on the Ethereum side, we've gotten really sophisticated in terms of like the order flow supply chain. In Ethereum, it's considerably more sophisticated than it is on Solana. And so when you start to think about where you can capture value at the edges, all of a sudden you look at this burgeoning ecosystem, which is clearly here to stay on the Solana side, and you're like, let's try to capture more value. And so I think that's why that happens.
Titandex is launching soon. They're a competitor to Jupiter. So there's, yeah, they're going to be good. One other point to this, I could also argue that solvers can charge higher fees. So the users kind of interacting with these meme coins, they're comfortable to pay like a, let's say a 5% fee because they're assuming they're going to make 100% in a day, right? So if solvers see this, the kind of, the customer group over there is very different from Ethereum, right? If you do USDC to ETH, you want the lowest because it's a more, stable asset, whereas on Solana, you can charge 5 up to 10% if you're able to do better rates than others.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the first question I asked, right, which is, do you have any problems lending your transactions, right? So that's where Preconf comes in, right? On Solana, you have a lot of problems lending your transactions. So having that Preconf is going to be, infinitely more useful over there. But, that's not to say that, it's not useful on the Ethereum side, right? We just have to, continue thinking, to see how we can make use of it. Okay. That is actually all the time that we have, but before I let you all go off, right, let's go back. Preconf, yeah or nay?
Yay. And thank you for having us.
Yes for cross-chain.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'd say yes for cross-chain specifically as well.
Okay, so we have we have converted everyone on this panel right now that they are all converts onto Preconf. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone.